All right, so I've got my cutout. I've got my gradated background. If you remember, I showed you that trick and recorded it of painting with two gradations at slightly different opacities, just to give a little bit more complexity. So already this is beautiful and interesting. But now we want our cloud to be beautiful and interesting. So I've got the cutout, but of course, even though the inside might look useful, even though it's not quite suggestive of my creature yet, the edges are not at all what you would expect to see in clouds. And so this is where I use some of our compositing skills. And just like we did in the cartoon jumble, I'm going to bring in more clouds. I'm just going to drop them in one at a time, do a rough cutout around them, just as we've done in past assignments. Command J to duplicate it so it's no longer a smart object. Then I'm going to go ahead and just delete the smart layer, because this is what I'm interested in. Notice some of them are wispier and have edges that are less defined than others. That's fine. Because this has several different types of clouds, I might actually keep that smart object, but just turn it off. Keep it in the background. So if I need to steal more clouds from that, that's a nice resource. If you need to add to a selection, you use Option. If you need to cut away, you use if you need to add to a selection, you use Shift. If you need to cut away, you use Option. And I want you to use at least 5 cloud references. But remember, one of them we've already used. So I just need one more. And yes, you could get all 5 clouds from one big photo. But it helps you practice to pull them from different sources. All right, now I'm going to turn these off and use them one by one. I thought this one would be particularly helpful for the kind of coral fins on my creature. So I'll start with that one. I have a placement in mind. So how do we clean up these clouds? More review. I'm going to use the magic wand, a pretty high tolerance of 32, and then hold down Shift to expand it even more. And notice I have contiguous turned off so that the little holes within the cloud where that blue shows up are also selected. But if I don't want it to do that, I can hold down Option with the lasso and I can subtract those from the selection. Or I can simply use the magic wand with contiguous turned on and then just work around the outside. Now, do you think I should use Refine Edge? I think it'd be a good idea so that I soften those pixels because clouds are generally softened. So I refine the edge and then I'll zoom in so you can see. It smooths it out quite a bit. I delete, and I delete a few times. Now the importance of that is because the sky colors don't match, right? And the reason we painted our own sky is we want our own sky to show behind the clouds. So if you have a little bit of a blue outline from a different sky, that's going to be very distracting. Some things to keep in mind when you're compositing with cloud stuff. The light source can be diffused across the cloud, but the direction of the lighting should stay pretty consistent. So I can tilt it, but I'm going to always need to keep the shadow on the bottom. If I flip it that way, it's going to look really weird. So these clouds are lit in a consistent way. Okay, you'll notice this cloud is a whole lot brighter than the cookie cutter cloud I made. But because it's organic material, I can also warp it. And I shouldn't lose too much of the believability unless I warp it too much, push it too far. Okay, now how do I blend it in? 100% big soft eraser, especially on the interior. Start blending it. How do I get the colors to match or the values to match? Same old tricks. Image adjustment, levels. Here I'm going to limit the highlights a little bit. Maybe play with the midtones to match my cookie cutter cloud a little bit better. Then just bite away at the edges and blend it. Once you've softened the edges, then you can use a lower opacity on your eraser. And I suggest that before you go right to clone stamping. We'll get there. And we kind of build it up from there. That's one reference down. Let's bring another one in. This might be helpful for the bottom, kind of the wispiness pulling away. I definitely need to get rid of all this blue. Make sure I'm on the right layer. Hold down Shift to add to selection. I want to liberally add. If I need to, I can use the lasso and Shift to delete these other parts. I just want that little dot there. All right. Now refine edge to soften it. Not soften too much, but get rid of that stair-stepping of the pixels. So when I delete here, you can see a little bit of that kind of bluishness coming through. And I have a little line here, which is a real pain. So before I do much else, I want to make sure that's completely gone. And I could use the 100% eraser, but I can also just lasso and hit delete. Okay, now levels. I want to keep it pretty bright. Might even give it a little bit more shadow because it'll be on the bottom. But this is an aspect of color balance. So if levels doesn't do it for you, you might need to change the color balance and slightly shift the temperature of the color. I need to add a little bit more yellow into this cloud. Had a little too much blue in it. And I love this tool because it's subtle, but you can always see what's going on. And with material that is white balanced, like clouds, it's very sensitive to color balance, to the color temperature. I can kind of warp it and pull it across. This will help be suggestive of my creature. First erase at 100%, knock off the hard edges. Use some ghosting, that's why I'm using such a huge brush. And a tablet, very softly tapping, letting the kind of echo effect of the eraser blend it in for me. Because where clouds come together and you get different different surfaces reflecting light, you do get the appearance of softer edges and harder edges. And I want to preserve that. So I don't want everything to just look all uniform. All right, 2 layers down. 2 references down. This one is a very different kind of color, but is a helpful shape. They're all the same kind of puffy cloud. This is all going to get erased anyway, so I don't need to worry too much about it. Refine Edge will help expand on all sides of that selection. And then hit delete a few times to take it down. I limit highlights quite a bit when I'm dealing with clouds, because if you exaggerate them, you just lose all visual texture. And visual texture is the main thing we want from these clouds. And then color balance will make a big difference here. And if you can't do it in midtones, you might even have to go to highlights. Make it a little bit more yellow. Trying to get more neutral tones. Okay. Now I wanted this to kind of separate the back from the fin a little. I can stretch it, warp it, bop it, pull it, twist it. This might give me a texture that's suggestive of the mustache too. Or just something that will help give me a reason to suggest a tusk. Now, so far, I'm only adding to my cookie cutter shape, but of course, at some point, I'm going to have to take away from that cookie cutter shape. And that's perfectly fine. But it's okay to have little bits of cloud kind of added to it as well. And I'm not zooming in. I'm trying not to get too focused on individual details yet. So don't rush through your compositing. I'm mostly using lighting to help separate different forms. Body, fins. And that has a lot to do with just the lighting involved. I'm trying not to be too afraid of color in the clouds. You know, as they're coming towards us, they're getting a little bit more colorful, a little bit brighter. But I am worried about losing texture. Like that's still a little too bright. Levels can help with that, but if I need to, I can go to burning tools. And I can burn down some of those midtones to get that texture, whatever texture is available, to show up. Notice that that's making it a lot more colorful. So then I use the sponge tool to desaturate those areas that I burned. Dodge and burn are tricky. We usually do them on a copy layer or on an overlay layer, but here you can use them more directly. And you'll see their powerful effect. Especially if a part of a cloud gets too colorful, the sponge tool can be very helpful. And I try to never go beyond a strength of 30 for the sponge tool or for dodging and burning, because they're really powerful. Usually I'll work them in the teens. Hard edges are the enemy here. I'm trying to cover a lot of them up. All right, let's save it. Just Command S, because I've already titled it as assignment 4. Then I just